Hi guys, welcome to my channel. This is Talk with Ola and I'm so thrilled to have you here once again. Today I want to talk about the most important features of an employment letter, and this is coming from an understanding of the employment scene in Nigeria as at today. Today the employment scene in Nigeria is completely messed up, and I say this as a lawyer who's worked with clients this year who have had terrible experiences at their employment and with their employers. So I would like to help as many people as possible prevent such terrible experiences in the future, and that's why I've decided to make this video. Also, it's important to note that you need a lawyer even at the point of getting an employment. I know that this is December and so many people are going to be getting employments, for them to resume in January in the next year. So it's very important for you to look at these clauses, these features in your employment letter before you sign the dotted lines and resume employment. I hope that somebody learns from this video and are able to escape those terrible experiences in the future. Before I get into it, I'd like to say that there are three types of employments. One is employment that's governed by statute. The second one is employment by written contract of employment, and the third one is employment at will or servant holding an office at the pleasure of the master. That's a master-servant relationship or a master-servant type of employment. But essentially, things could overlap. For instance, in a master-servant relationship, I employ someone at will. For instance, I could employ someone to cook and clean for me and pay them. That's a master-servant relationship. I am the master, they are the servant. But we could reduce our terms and conditions to writing, and that makes it an employment based on a contract of employment. These types of employments could overlap, but the most important thing is that at the point of employment, there must be consensus ad idem. That's the agreement of the minds between the employer and the employee. What happens these days is that so many people are so eager to get employment. So for instance, someone has been trying, has applied 500 times, has been interviewed 400 times, has gotten rejected 350 times, and he just gets one employment. He's so eager to resume that he's not even considering the terms and the conditions. And sometimes some people see these terrible terms and conditions and they actually sign up for them because they need the money and they need to survive. So one thing I'd like to say is that do not get to that point of desperation where you're not considering the terms and conditions before you sign the dotted lines. It's very important. If you can, and you should, please get a lawyer to read, understand, and interpret your employment letter to you. It's very important. Get a lawyer to interpret the employment letter to you and probably try to renegotiate terms that are not favorable to you. If you cannot do that, it's better to decline the employment and look for something better, because one thing I've noticed is that at the end of the day, later on, many of these employees would say that, had they known, or they would have said that they did not foresee that their employer could be so wicked and devilish. I also made some notes about some other things that you should know about employment. And the first thing I'd like to say is that a contract of employment should be reduced to writing. It is very important and non-negotiable at this day and age. I know that parole agreements are admissible, but it's better if you have something that's reduced to writing. It just clears all doubts and makes your work easier, in case there's a breakdown in relationship and you need to claim some things. The second thing is that the terms must be cast in stone. Do not leave anything to chance. If they want to pay you a certain commission, make sure there's a percentage, a defined percentage, because people can get funny. If they are paying you a certain sum of money, make sure the money is clearly stated. If you're entitled to an amount of work days for leave or sick leave or what have you, let the days be clearly stated. Do not leave anything to chances. Make sure the terms of your employment are cast in stone. The third thing to note is that both parties must sign. Usually for employment letters, when you're sent an employment letter, they will tell you that once you sign, you confirm the employment. So make sure that your employer signs, you sign, and you keep a signed copy for yourself. The fourth thing is that if any of the terms or conditions are going to be renegotiated or changed in the course of your employment, make sure that it's reduced to writing as well, and you have a signed copy, a duly signed copy. Final thing is that make sure you get a lawyer to read. I've said that before. Get a lawyer to read, and to interpret the terms and the conditions of the contract to you before you sign. So once you sign the employment letter and resume as appropriate, it is deemed that the employment letter is binding. And now it's important for you to note that as an employee, the employment letter is not only protecting your interests. As a matter of fact, employment letters are sometimes wired to protect the interests of the employer. So you have to look out for your own interests as well. Both interests must be protected in an employment letter. That's very important. So having said that, let's go into the features of an employment letter. The first thing that should be on your employment letter is the position you are being employed for. So you should say something like, "Dear sir," or "Dear ma," or "Dear Mujola Oluwa, you have been employed," or "we wish to communicate our decision to employ you as our general manager." The employment letter must reflect the position you are being employed for. The second thing it must reflect is your resumption date. It must have a clear resumption date. So you must say that you are to resume duty on so date, and that's when you start work. That's when the employment letter begins to bind on both you and your employer. The third thing is the basic salary or compensation. That must never be left to chance. If they are paying you any amount, it must be reduced to writing in clear figures. "Oh, we're paying you 5,368,022 kobo per month." It must be reduced to writing. Do not leave that to chance, and look out for that always in your employment letter. The next thing is all the other accruing benefits, so HMO, insurance, this, that, and of course you must state your pension, how the pension will be paid and who it will be paid to, and all of that. So all the other benefits and all the other things must be stated, how they will deduct your taxes and remit it to the government. All those things should be stated in your employment letter. Another thing is targets. For instance, if you're getting employed and you need to meet certain targets, it must be stated in your employment letter. It's very important for you to know what you're going there to do. And then the next thing is your job description. That one is non-negotiable. The employment letter must disclose the scope of your duties and your role in your position. It must state that, "Oh, you are to do this and this and this and this and this and this." And if at any point in time during your employment it's going to be changed, it should be reduced to writing and communicated to you and duly signed and accepted again, all over again. It's very important because I know that I have been in an employment whereby they changed my job description every other week, and it was just a funny situation. Employers are very funny. And sometimes you might not realize that your job description is being changed, but you just realize that, along the line, they're giving you this role to do, that role to do, and you're probably not being compensated for it, or the compensation is not even commensurate to what you're doing. So these are the things that employees in the future like to lament about. "Oh, I did this for them, I did that for them." If you're doing anything, make sure you're being compensated for it, and make sure it is stated as in your employment letter as what you should be doing, okay? It's not a charity. So don't go about doing charity and then crying foul later. Another thing your employment letter must contain is provision for leave. If you're going to take to be, of course, the law provides for, the law protects, the right of an employee to be given a period of, rest during employment. So they must provide for your leave. That, okay, you're entitled to an annual leave of 7 days, blah 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 blah, and all of that. Another thing is the probationary period. If you're being employed based on probation, it must be stated in your employment letter that, okay, you're being employed on probation for 6 months, or you're being employed on probation for 3 months, and after that you will be confirmed. Of course, the law is that if after your probation period you're still working and your employer has not communicated a confirmation or a rejection or termination to you, you are deemed confirmed. That's the position in Babalola and Equinox and so many other cases. But essentially, if you're being employed based on probation, it must be clearly stated in your employment letter. This applies to most employments. The confidentiality clause is deemed assumed. I mean, you should know that this information that comes to you by virtue of your role in a company should be kept confidential, but it's also safe if an employer includes that in your employment letter, because once you sign it, if you go ahead and divulge or disclose information that comes to you in your capacity as an employee of that company to third parties without their knowledge or approval, then you have to bear the consequences. The employer cannot come and claim later when there's a court case or something that, oh, we employed him or her based on probation, if it's not stated in the employment letter. Another thing an employment letter should contain are your working hours. You will be working from 9 to 5 every day, Mondays to Friday, Mondays to Saturdays. Those things must be clearly stated in your employment letter. Then the dress code and grooming policy, if they have one. Oh, you're supposed to wear white from Monday to Thursday and natives on Friday. Or you're supposed to dress corporate, or you're supposed to be corporate casual, or you're supposed to be this or that. It must be stated if they have one. Another thing is confidentiality clause. Another thing that should be contained in your employment letter are the other terms and conditions. If your employer has some peculiar terms and conditions, it should be stated in your employment letter. Another important thing, in fact, the most important thing that should be in your employment letter is the termination clause, especially for contract-based employment and employment master-servant relationships that have been reduced to a contract-based employment. Because we all know that for statutory employment, you cannot terminate the employment except according to the statute that gave rise to the employment in the first place. So for employment based on contract or agreement, the termination clause is very important. The employment letter must disclose how and when an employee can be terminated. You know, how they can be dismissed, maybe for fraud or something, and how they can be terminated. And of course, the law now, according to Bello and EcoBank, the law now is that, you know, if an employer is terminating the employment of his employee, he must give reasons. So you can no longer terminate at will for no reason, as used to be the law. You have to give reasons why you're terminating the employment. So the conditions for terminating an employment, how the employment is going to be terminated, must be stated in the employment letter. The validity of the employment letter is contingent upon the signature of both parties. So those are the very important features of an employment letter. Please look out for these things as you accept employment this season to resume next year. And I do hope that you have a wonderful employment experience come 2021. I will see you in my very next video. Toodles!